In January 1964, moviegoers settled into their seats across America and watched a man in a cowboy hat ride a hydrogen bomb toward the earth, waving his Stetson in the air, whooping like he'd just burst out of a rodeo shoot on a Friday night. The image lasted only seconds on screen. It has lasted 6 decades in the cultural memory of American cinema. Here's the part that still catches people off guard. Of every single person on that London soundstage, the cowboy was the only one who wasn't performing. The hat wasn't a costume department rental. It was his. The boots were his. The drawl wasn't coached by a dialect trainer. It was the voice he was born with, the one that followed him out of California's San Joaquin Valley when he was still a teenager. Every other screen cowboy in Hollywood history was an actor who learned to ride, learned to rope, and learned to talk like the West. This man was the West, and he only stumbled into acting after 2 full decades of climbing onto the backs of bulls for prize money that barely covered the cost of driving to the next rodeo. But the name people saw printed on that screen wasn't the name his parents gave him. Someone else handed him that name, and they didn't mean it as a gift. They meant it as a put-down, a 2-word verdict that said he wasn't talented enough, wasn't serious enough, and probably wasn't going to last. He took the name anyway and carried it for 45 years, turning it into something that meant the exact opposite of what the man who invented it intended. That's a particular kind of stubbornness, and it tells you almost everything you need to know about who he was. Keep 3 things in the back of your mind as this story unfolds. First, that name and the quiet insult locked inside it. Second, a blue roan horse standing in a Montana pasture, bought for $150 at a time when nobody expected much from either of them, who would go on to earn more Hollywood screen credits than most actors who trained for years to get there. Third, a single sentence he spoke late in his life about retirement, a sentence that turned out not to be an opinion but a promise, one he made good on right up until the very end. His given name was Lewis Burton Lindley Jr. The world came to know him as Slim Pickens. And before any casting director or film producer ever laid eyes on him, his own father had already delivered the harshest review of his life, telling him plainly that if he chased what he loved, he wouldn't have a home to return to. He chased it anyway. This is the story of what that chase looked like, told through 10 moments that defined the most genuinely authentic cowboy who ever set foot on a Hollywood movie set. Number 1. The boy who was told he had no home. He came into the world on the 29th of June, 1919, in Kingsburg, California, a quiet farming community in the San Joaquin Valley sitting south of Fresno. His father, Lewis Burt Lindley Sr., was Texas-born and had come west to work the land, eventually running a dairy farm. His mother, Sally, had made her way out from Missouri. That combination of Texas roots on one side and Missouri blood on the other goes a long way toward explaining the single biggest misconception people held about him for the rest of his life. Audiences heard that unmistakable Southern drawl and made an instant assumption. They figured he was from Texas, maybe raised on the range somewhere out near Amarillo or Lubbock. He wasn't. He was a California farm boy through and through, the son of a dairyman, raised among fruit orchards and irrigation ditches in the flat Central Valley heat. The drawl he carried was his father's drawl, inherited the way you inherit eye color or a stubborn streak, not something he practiced or put on. At home, the family called him Bert. He was on horseback by the time he was 4 years old, still too small to climb up without help, but already comfortable in the saddle, in a way that other kids his age were comfortable on a bicycle. He watched his father run the dairy operation, watched the rhythm of early mornings and late evenings, watched the cycle of seasons dictate what got done and when. And somewhere in those early years, the conclusion settled in him like something permanent. Milking cows twice a day for the rest of his life was a slow way to disappear. He wanted something louder, something that moved, something that required the kind of nerve that made your hands sweat before you went in. He had no way of knowing yet that what he was looking for had a name, that there were arenas full of people who had already found it, and that the road out of Kingsburg would eventually run straight through every major rodeo circuit in the American West before it ever came close to a film studio. Rodeo didn't make men rich. It made them bruised, broke, and hungry for more. A winning ride might put a few dollars in your pocket. A clean steer rope, maybe a few more. But for a 16-year-old boy, growing up in a valley where entire families couldn't keep the lights on, a few dollars wasn't pocket change. It was survival money. It was hope with a dollar sign in front of it. His father wasn't interested in hope. The elder Lindley came down hard, and he came down fast. According to his daughter, the warning wasn't delivered gently over supper. It was a line drawn in the dirt. If the Lindley name ever appeared on a rodeo entry list, the boy would come home to find the door locked and his place at the table gone. No second chances, no appeals. That was the arrangement. Think about what that ultimatum actually meant in 1935. There was no backup plan for a farm kid. There were no scholarships, no career counselors, no safety nets of any kind. The farm was the whole future, and his own father had just told him he could walk away from it or chase rodeo, but he couldn't do both. Most boys in that position turn around, go back to the barn, and learn to want something smaller. So what does a kid do when the thing he loves most might cost him the only home he's ever had? He went anyway. He drove out to that rodeo, walked up to the registration table, and stopped cold. The story has been passed down through his family for decades, told the same way every time. He looked at the man holding the entry forms and just said it out loud. "I don't know what to do. My dad told me if he sees my name on a contestant entry, I'm not going to have a home to come to." That was it. No performance, no strategy, just a scared kid telling the truth to a stranger. The man behind the table had been doing this a long time. He'd watched hundreds of farm boys roll in with fire in their eyes and roll out again on a stretcher or with nothing but dirt on their boots. He looked this skinny, half-grown kid over slowly, took him in from hat to heel, and delivered his verdict. There'd be slim pickings out there for a boy like him. Then he wrote those exact words down as a name on the entry form. Slim Pickens. It wasn't encouragement. It wasn't even neutral. It was a grown man mocking a teenager's ambition to his face and filing it away as paperwork. A casual cruelty, the kind that was probably forgotten by the man who said it before the afternoon was done. The boy did not forget it. He also did not prove the man right. That same afternoon, the kid who'd just been told he had no business being there reportedly walked away with $400 in his hand. In 1935, that wasn't just a good day at the rodeo. That was more money than some working men in that entire valley cleared in 6 months. He had defied a father who promised to disown him, accepted a stranger's insult as a name, and come out ahead of nearly every other competitor on the grounds. Not bad for a boy with slim pickings. And he never once tried to correct the record. He never went back to Lewis Burton Lindley Jr. The name Slim Pickens followed him out of that dusty registration tent and stuck to him like a second skin for the rest of his life. He carried it through rodeo arenas across North America, through more than 150 film and television productions, and all the way into the Cowboy Hall of Fame. The kid's real name faded out. The insult took root, grew into an identity, and the identity grew into a legend. But winning $400 on his first day out, that was the easy part. That was the good afternoon. What came after it was something else entirely. The next 20 years were a different kind of story, written in pain and bone and sheer physical punishment. What actually happens to a man who spends 2 decades planting himself between a 2,000-pound bull and a rider who's already hit the ground? The answer is brutal, and it's specific. 17 broken bones, all on one side of his body. That number comes from the rodeo itself, from the rough stock events that Slim threw himself into from the very beginning. Bareback bronc, saddle bronc, Brahma bulls. The most dangerous disciplines in an already dangerous profession. The events where the difference between a championship purse and a trip to the hospital was often just a matter of seconds. One afternoon, a scheduled rodeo clown failed to appear. and Slim stepped up to fill the spot. Most people hear the phrase rodeo clown and picture some guy in grease paint and oversized shoes tripping over himself for a laughing crowd. That picture couldn't be further from the truth. The correct term for the job is bullfighter, and the correct description of the job is this. After a bull has thrown its rider, one man on foot, with no weapon and no armor, walks directly in front of that animal and puts his own body between several hundred pounds of rage and a cowboy who may already be unconscious in the dirt, because someone has to do it and nobody else is volunteering. Slim didn't simply take the job and survive it, he mastered it. He became widely recognized as the best bullfighter working in America, performing in the Spanish style, dressed in a proper torero's outfit, and working a cape with genuine technique. He appeared at every major venue the circuit had to offer: the Cow Palace in San Francisco, the Calgary Stampede, Cheyenne Frontier Days, the Pendleton Roundup. These weren't small county fairs. These were the biggest, roughest, most competitive rodeo stages on the continent. Rex Allen, who crossed paths with Slim on the circuit long before either man had a Hollywood credit to his name, said plainly that Slim was the top clown bullfighter in the entire business. Coming from someone who knew the world as well as Allen did, that wasn't a casual compliment. The cost of that career is preserved in Slim's medical records, and he was willing to lay it out in plain terms himself, particularly in the last year of his life. He said that after one bad wreck, doctors x-rayed just one side of his body and found 17 broken bones on that side alone, and that was from a single incident. The full accounting of his injuries reads less like a medical file and more like a battlefield casualty report. A crushed chest, 2 fractured skulls, 2 broken wrists, a broken elbow, a broken collarbone, a broken left hand, broken feet on 5 separate occasions, his back broken twice, and ribs too numerous to track, so he eventually stopped counting them. What did all of that buy him financially? Not much, as it turns out. He said he came by the nickname Slim honestly, given that in those years the rodeo circuit paid next to nothing. The situation got so desperate that in 1942, at a rodeo in Prescott, Arizona, he pawned his own boots just to cover the entry fee. Think about what that means for a moment. A cowboy, whose boots are practically an extension of his identity, handed them over for cash so he could walk into an arena and let a bull try to kill him for nearly no pay. It's the kind of detail that's almost too bleak to be funny, and yet Slim carried it around like a badge. Years down the road, once he'd landed in Hollywood and started collecting film and television credits, he had a line he liked to use when people asked how he'd adjusted to the entertainment industry. He'd say that all those years of rodeo punishment had simply conditioned him for whatever a movie producer was going to throw at him. It was a good line, and he delivered it with the ease of a man who meant every word. So when the Second World War broke out and the country mobilized, the question becomes obvious. What happened to the toughest man on the circuit? Number 4. The word that cost him a war. He enlisted. In the early 1940s, along with millions of other American men, Slim raised his hand and signed up. Then, by his own account, the story takes a turn that he spent the rest of his life retelling. A clerk processing his paperwork asked him to state his occupation. Slim answered honestly, with the only word that applied: rodeo. The clerk heard radio. That single misheard syllable changed the entire trajectory of his wartime service. Instead of shipping out overseas, the Army took the best bullfighter in North America and stationed him at a radio post somewhere in the middle of the country. They put a microphone in front of a man who had been absorbing bullhorns and broken bones for years because a clerk had written down the wrong word and nobody caught it. Slim told the story as a joke for the next 4 decades. It always landed. A whole generation of American men came back from the war, carrying stories that would shape everything that came after. Slim Pickens came back with one about a hard-of-hearing clerk who couldn't process what was right in front of him. It was a small moment, but it fit perfectly into a much larger pattern. one that traced itself from his boyhood in Kingsburg all the way to his eventual induction into the Cowboy Hall of Fame. His entire life was a series of people taking one quick look and deciding they already knew exactly what he was. Too small to rodeo seriously, too rough around the edges for pictures, too country, too unpolished, too much of a clown to be treated as a real actor. And every single time someone slapped one of those labels on him, Slim didn't fight back. He didn't argue, didn't complain, didn't push. He just showed up again. That stubborn, quiet habit of simply appearing at the next county fairground, the next dusty arena, the next small-town rodeo, was exactly what eventually put him in front of the one pair of eyes that mattered. It raises a genuine question, doesn't it? What exactly does a Hollywood director see when he watches a man fight a full-grown bull for a living? Number 5. Errol Flynn and 10 Years of Going Nowhere. Director William Keighley was watching a rodeo in the late 1940s when Slim's act stopped him cold. He offered Slim a screen test on the spot, and the result was a 1,950 Warner Brothers Western called Rocky Mountain, filmed out around Gallup, New Mexico. The picture starred Errol Flynn as a Confederate officer, and Slim was cast as a plainsman named Plank. It was a real movie, with a real star, at a real studio. For a rodeo hand from Kingsburg, it was about as big a break as you could imagine. Flynn's narration paints Plank as a hard and bitter man, someone carrying chain gang scars on his legs by the age of 22. Slim himself was 31 when that film shot. That same year, he married a woman named Margaret Harmon, and she stayed by his side until the day he died. So heading into the 1950s, Slim had a foot in the door of Hollywood and a solid marriage behind him. What he didn't have was momentum. For the next 10 years, almost nothing moved. Republic Pictures signed him and immediately slotted him into their B-Western assembly line, casting him as the comic sidekick to singing cowboy Rex Allen. The partnership started with Colorado Sundown in 1952 and ground out 9 pictures in total. They were cheap, they were fast, and they were forgotten almost before the reels stopped spinning. Slim said later that he'd been in so many Republic B-Westerns, he genuinely couldn't remember or count them all. That's not modesty. That's just the math of disposable product. This stretch of his career is the part that usually gets glossed over, and it really shouldn't be. Between 1,950 and 1,961, Slim Pickens was a working actor going absolutely nowhere. He was the comic relief, tucked into the back half of a double bill that nobody was still thinking about come Monday morning. He spent his 30s, then crept into his 40s, cashing modest checks and watching younger men with sharper looks and better agent connections climb right past him. He wasn't failing, exactly. He was just treading water in a very deep pool. Think about what that trade actually looked like on paper. He had walked away from a rodeo career that had already broken his bones and battered his body in ways most people never experience. He'd given that up for a film career that was, at this particular moment, breaking nothing at all, not even new ground. The excitement, the danger, the pure physical edge of the arena had been swapped for walk-on roles and forgotten westerns. It had to sting, at least a little. But here's the thing. Slim owned something during all those lean years that no other actor in Hollywood could have purchased at any price. It wasn't a skill you could learn in an acting class. It wasn't a connection you could make at the right party. It was standing quietly in a pasture up in Montana. So what was it? And what was it actually worth to a career that looked, from the outside, like it was going nowhere fast? Number 6. The $150 horse. Back in 1954, Slim was passing through Montana when he spotted a blue roan Appaloosa gelding standing in a field. He bought the horse for $150. It seemed like a simple decision at the time, the kind of thing a man does when he sees an animal that catches his eye. But that horse was about to become something far more interesting than a pasture companion. He called that horse Dear John, and what he did with that animal tells you more about who Slim Pickens really was than any studio biography ever could. He didn't just ride Dear John. He trained him, patiently and methodically, until the horse could buck on cue, sit down like a dog on command, and pull a blanket clean off his own back without any prompting. That wasn't a trick pony act. That was a working partnership between two professionals. Slim could also handle a 6-horse stagecoach team at full run, a skill so specialized and so vanishing that most people in the industry didn't even know what they were looking at when they saw it done right. By 1958, Hollywood had a problem it didn't want to admit. The big productions needed authentic horsemanship, but the stars on their posters couldn't always deliver it. That's where Dear John earned his keep. A major studio western called The Big Country came together that year with a serious budget, serious ambitions, and Gregory Peck's name above the title. Peck was one of the most respected actors in the business. He was also not the man you wanted in the saddle for a hard, open-ground gallop across wide terrain. The long shots needed someone who could really ride, and ride at speed, and make it look effortless. Slim Pickens did every one of those shots for him, uncredited, on Dear John. One of the biggest movie stars alive got the poster. The rodeo clown got the dirt and the distance. After that job, Slim made himself a rule, and he never bent it. If a production wanted the horse, they got the man too, no exceptions. He also liked to tell people, with a perfectly straight face, that Dear John was pulling down a bigger paycheck than he was. Given what Republic Pictures had been paying him for years, that line probably had more truth in it than joke. His one bankable asset in Hollywood at that point was a trained animal. The horse had real leverage. The man behind the reins was still working to get any at all. Keep the name Dear John in your memory, because it surfaces again in a story you would never connect it to. But before that, a movie star had to get hit in the head, and the man who did it didn't hold back. Number 7. The day Slim Pickens split Marlon Brando's forehead open. In 1961, Marlon Brando did something almost no actor of his stature had attempted. He directed a film himself, a western called One-Eyed Jacks. The project had a tangled history before it ever reached him. A young Stanley Kubrick had been attached to it first. Then a sharp, difficult screenwriter named Sam Peckinpah left his fingerprints on the material. Then Brando stepped in, took creative control, and made it entirely his own. Every man in that chain of custody would matter to Slim Pickens before his career was finished. That's not a coincidence worth brushing past. Brando cast Slim as Deputy Lon Dedrick, a lawman written as mean, leering, and genuinely threatening. This wasn't comic relief. It wasn't a sidekick part or a bit of color in the background. For the first time in 11 years of steady work, somebody in Hollywood was trusting Slim Pickens to play a man with real menace underneath him. That kind of casting doesn't happen unless someone is paying close attention. Brando was. During the filming of a jailbreak sequence, Slim was scripted to catch Brando across the head with a rifle butt. The scene called for impact, and Slim delivered exactly what was asked. Newspaper accounts from the production reported that the blow opened Brando's forehead badly enough to require stitches. The injury was serious enough that the crew had to adjust their shooting plan, filming Brando from one specific side of his face for several days while he healed. The most celebrated actor in America was sitting in a doctor's chair because the former rodeo clown hadn't pulled the hit. There was no lawsuit. There was no firing. No one on that production seemed to hold it against him, because the truth was plain to anyone who'd been on set. Slim hadn't done anything reckless. He'd done exactly what the scene required, with full commitment and without flinching. That reputation, the understanding that Slim Pickens hit like the real thing because he was the real thing, became a permanent piece of working knowledge in the industry. You hired him, knowing what you were getting. And somewhere, a director was paying close attention to all of it. Stanley Kubrick had once been attached to this exact picture before Brando claimed it. Now, watching the footage and the performance Slim had delivered as Dedrick, Kubrick took note of the face, the physicality, and the quality of the man behind both. He filed it away and kept it there. He wouldn't forget. Kubrick had a crisis on his hands, and the clock was running out. He needed someone for a role that had already defeated every conventional option he'd tried, including a flat rejection from one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. What do you do when the most meticulous, most controlling director who ever sat behind a camera can't find the one man his movie requires? This is entry number 8, The Cowboy Who Rode the Bomb. Stanley Kubrick was deep into production on Dr. Strangelove, and the role of Major T.J. King Kong, the drawling, patriotic commander of a nuclear-armed B-52, was in serious trouble. The plan had been to hand the part to Peter Sellers, who was already carrying 3 separate roles in the film. But Sellers hurt his ankle, couldn't crack the Texas accent convincingly inside that cramped and suffocating cockpit set, and eventually had to step away. That left Kubrick with a hole at the center of one of his film's most important storylines. He went to John Wayne first. Wayne reportedly didn't even bother to respond. No letter, no call, no explanation, just silence, which from a man of Wayne's stature was its own kind of answer. Kubrick then turned to Dan Blocker, the big, affable actor best known for playing Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza. Blocker's representation wired back that the material was too far to the left for their client's taste, and that was that. Screenwriter Terry Southern described exactly what Kubrick was after at that point, and it wasn't a trained actor doing his best impression of a cowboy. Kubrick wanted the real thing, an authentic character pulled straight from actual American life, not a performance, but a person. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Kubrick remembered a deputy sheriff from years earlier who had cracked a pistol across Marlon Brando's forehead on a film set and thought absolutely nothing of it. That deputy was Slim Pickens. There's a story that circulates constantly, the claim that Slim Pickens genuinely didn't know he was making a comedy. That version is almost certainly an overstatement. But here's what is absolutely true. Slim was directed to play a man who believed in every single word he said and every order he followed. A man who had no doubt, no irony, and no hesitation. The comedy in his performance doesn't come from him trying to be funny. It comes from him being completely, devastatingly earnest in a world that has gone insane around him. James Earl Jones was in that cockpit with him, right there through the whole production, and Jones described what he witnessed with real precision. He said Pickens was Major Kong on the set and off it. He didn't dial anything up for the cameras, and he didn't dial anything back when they cut. His temperament stayed the same. His language stayed the same. His entire manner stayed the same, from the moment he arrived to the moment he left. That kind of consistency isn't acting technique. It's just who a person is. Here's something that puts the whole situation into even sharper focus. Slim Pickens had never once left the United States before this job. At 44 years old, he had to scramble to get his first passport just so he could board a plane to London. And when he landed and showed up to the Shepperton Studios set for the first time, he walked in wearing his own cowboy hat, his own fringed jacket, and his own boots, because that's what he wore. That's what he owned. That's what he was comfortable in. He didn't pack those clothes to get into character. He packed them because they were his clothes. The British crew watched this man stride through the door, dressed head to toe like he'd just stepped off a ranch in Nevada, and reached a unanimous conclusion. This must be a deeply committed method actor who never breaks from his role. The reality was far simpler and far more interesting. He wasn't in character, he was just himself. The costume department barely had anything left to do. Even the details inside that bomb bay had a dark wit running through them. The 2 nuclear weapons hanging in the set were labeled with jokes written right on their casings. One read, "Hi there." The other was named Dear John, a nod to Slim's own horse back home. Kubrick's sense of humor was threaded into every corner of the production, even the props nobody was supposed to read too closely. And then came the shot that made film history. Slim Pickens on top of the bomb, hat waving above his head, letting out a whoop, plunging through the clouds toward the end of the world, with the pure, uncomplicated joy of a man at a rodeo. Reports from people who were on that production say the sequence required well over 100 takes to get right. 100 takes of the same ride, the same whoop, the same grin, and Slim Pickens delivered every single one of them like it was the first. Against a budget of roughly $1.8 million, Dr. Strangelove pulled in around $9.7 million at the box office. It earned a permanent place in the National Film Registry, and that single image of a cowboy in a Stetson straddling a falling nuclear warhead became a cultural shorthand for the entire Cold War era. That image gets shown in classrooms to students who have never once sat down and watched the film from start to finish. Slim's own take on what the movie did for him was, as ever, completely without poetry. He said that after Dr. Strangelove, the roles got bigger, the dressing rooms got bigger, and the checks got bigger. He was 45 years old when that happened. After spending 15 years as the reliable sidekick, the guy Hollywood kept in the background while somebody else got the close-up, the industry finally woke up to what it actually had in him. So what does a man do with that kind of power? The kind he spent half his life waiting to hold. Number 9. The role he turned down and the line he made immortal. The second half of Slim Pickens' career reads like a greatest hits reel for a certain generation of American moviegoer. These are pictures that men of a particular age can quote in full, without warning, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary conversation. In 1972, he played Ance Peterson in The Cowboys, holding his own opposite John Wayne, which was no small thing. That same year, he showed up in the back half of Sam Peckinpah's The Getaway, alongside Steve McQueen, and somehow walked off with every scene he stepped into. Then, 1974 arrived, and Mel Brooks put a black hat on his head and handed him one of the great comic villain roles in American film history. He played Taggart in Blazing Saddles, the thuggish, dim-witted foreman who somehow functioned as the straight man in a movie built entirely on absurdity. The line, "What in the wide, wide world of sports is a-goin' on here?" has a genuinely strange kind of immortality. 50 years later, grown men still say it to each other in parking lots, in hardware stores, at family barbecues, and they laugh every single time. Blazing Saddles was the highest-grossing film of its year. Around 63 million North American moviegoers bought a ticket to see it. Made on a budget of $2.6 million, the film has since taken in something close to $119 million worldwide. And just like Dr. Strangelove, it holds a permanent spot in the National Film Registry. Slim Pickens appeared in two of the most carefully preserved American comedies ever committed to film, and he played both of them completely straight. No winking at the camera, no breaking character, just pure conviction from start to finish. Then, around 1979, Stanley Kubrick approached Slim Pickens again for The Shining. He wanted him to play Dick Halloran, the Overlook Hotel's head chef with second sight. By any actor's logic, it should have been an easy yes. Kubrick had already turned Slim from a B-Western rodeo clown into one of cinema's most unforgettable images in Dr. Strangelove. But Slim refused. His condition was simple. Kubrick had to agree, in writing, not to shoot more than 100 takes per shot. It sounded strange until you remembered what Slim had already endured. On Dr. Strangelove, he had ridden that mechanical bomb again and again, take after take, until his body had paid the price. By then, he was 60 years old, and he wasn't willing to give Kubrick that same blank check twice. The role went to Scatman Crothers. According to the story, Kubrick did push Crothers past 100 takes on a single shot. Slim had read the situation perfectly. Instead, he returned to Columbia, California, and kept working on his own terms. Then came the 4-minute scene that proved he was far more than a rodeo clown in a funny hat. In 1973, Sam Peckinpah cast him in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid as Sheriff Baker, an aging, worn-down lawman who joins one last fight he has no real business being part of. When Baker is shot in the stomach, Peckinpah does not cut away. He holds the camera on Slim. Baker slowly walks down to the river, sits on the bank, and waits to die. No big speech, no heroic final line, just an old man, quietly accepting the end. His wife, played by Katie Girardo, follows him. She does not scream or beg. She stands there with tears in her eyes and lets him go because she understands what he wants. That restraint is what makes the scene unforgettable. Bob Dylan was so moved by that moment that he wrote "Knockin' on Heaven's Door" for Slim Pickens and Katie Girardo. The full vocal version was added in the studio's theatrical release, not Peckinpah's own preview cut, but the scene became legendary anyway. It endures because of Slim's face, his silence, and the exhausted dignity he brought to that riverbank. Recognition came later. In 1982, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum inducted him into the Hall of Great Western Performers. The Rodeo Hall of Fame followed in 1986, and the Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame honored him in 2005, long after his death. These were not consolation prizes. They were acknowledgments from the world that had shaped him. Slim once said he had no plans to retire from acting until they shoveled dirt in his face. For him, there was no reason to walk away from something he loved if it still made him happy. In August 1982, surgeons removed a brain tumor. Pneumonia followed, and he never fully recovered. On the 8th of December 1983, Slim Pickens died in Modesto, California, at 64, with his wife and daughters beside him. His funeral was held in Columbia, the gold country town he had chosen as home. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered over the trails he had ridden for so much of his life. In Oklahoma City, the Cowboy Hall of Fame lowered the California state flag to half-staff in his honor. When you look at the whole life, it almost sounds impossible. A dairy farmer's son, a teenager whose stage name came from a cruel joke at a rodeo, 17 broken bones from years of riding animals that did not want to be ridden, a horse bought for $150 that earned more than he did, years of small rodeos, county fairs, dead-end bookings, and stubborn survival. Then, after all that, he became part of one of the most famous images of the Cold War era, riding a nuclear bomb into history in Dr. Strangelove. And years later, he delivered one of the greatest death scenes ever filmed in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. None of it happens without the losing streak, without the broken bones, without the years of showing up when nobody was paying attention. Slim Pickens never chased the spotlight. He just kept working, kept riding, and kept being himself until the spotlight finally found him. That is why his story deserves to be told properly. If this one stayed with you, hit subscribe and join us over at Golden Secrets, because these are the men and women that time keeps trying to bury, and we're not letting that happen. There are plenty more stories just like this one waiting for you. See you in the next one.